At this stage of the journey, I'd spent quite a lot of time in France, but very little of it in Paris. And I was advised and could see for myself that it wouldn't have been wise to try and drive there. So sadly, I parted with the little Fiat, giving it back to the hire car company. We boarded a Bullet Tran and travelled the 179 kilometres to Gare du Nord station, which is the main station in Paris.
Trains in France really fly. I think we must be doing somewhere around about 200 kilometres an hour right now.
Taking some 1.5 hours. The motel that we had booked into was about 2.1 kilometres from the station, although we took the metro. I was very surprised in taking the metro that the trains there had rubber tyres. That's something I'd never seen before. Likewise, the quality of the buskers there was simply amazing. The hotel that I booked into was the Le Moreuil. It was quite well appointed. However, cheap accommodation and Paris are not two words you hear in the same sentence. And one thing to look out for there is not all the hotels are air conditioned. And in the time I was there, it was quite hot, and we very much welcomed the air conditioning. In the evening, we made use of the gym facilities, which are quite well kept, and then proceeded to explore Paris. Paris has a fascinating history.
Paris city has a population estimated at 2,153,600 in the metro area and 9,854,000 in the river port. It's the capital of France. It is now located on both banks of the Seine River. The original settlement from which Paris evolved, Lutetia, was in existence by the late 3rd century before Christ on an island in the Seine. Lutetia was captured and fortified by the Romans in 52 before Christ during the 1st century. After Christ, the city spread to the left bank of the Seine. By the early 4th century it was known as Parris. It withstood several Viking sieges in the years 885 to 887 and became the capital of France in 987, when Hugh Capet, the Count of Paris, became king. The city was improved during the reign of Philip II, who formally recognized the University of Paris in the year 1200. In the 14th to 15th centuries its development was hindered by the Black Death and the 100 Years' War. In the 17th to the 18th centuries it was improved and beautified. Leading events of the French Revolution took place in Paris 1789 to 1799. Napoleon III commissioned Georges Eugene Horseman to modernize the city's infrastructure and add several new bridges over the Seine. The city was the site of the Paris Peace Conference, which ended World War I. During World War II, Paris was occupied by German troops. It is now the financial, commercial, transportation, artistic, and intellectual center of France.
After a hearty breakfast, Leap and myself were making our way up the Seine. And as we progressed in the distance, the Eiffel Tower was getting larger and larger. Somewhat shorter than expected, but still an amazing sight. It's impossible to separate France from the Eiffel Tower. Even when you buy a SIM card at the airport, the tool they give you is in the shape of the Eiffel Tower. Good Stuff Eiffel was famous for his steel constructions. He produced bridges and viaducts, many of which are still standing today. As you move along, you notice other structures, mini versions of the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was gifted by France to America, and as we all know, built in New York. the internal structure of the Statue of Liberty was designed and constructed by Gustav Eiffel. The pathway to the construction of the Eiffel Tower is a fascinating area to look at. And although it may seem a little bit off script, it says a lot about the psychology of the people of the time and how they've changed. Maybe it was the culture of the French Republic. Maybe it was the rejection of crash American capitalism, the lack of an English class system, or the arrogance of the Germans. Indeed, it was possible to argue with Napoleon. You could argue with that gentleman the facts of the case, and there would be no consequences at the end of the argument. Imagine doing that with Hitler. Imagine going to Hitler and telling him he was wrong. It'd go something like this. Irken in the Blocken! Followed by, the argument would be over. For the 1889 World Fair, they wanted an impressive tower for people to walk through. Maurice Pucknar and Amir Nouvier did a very rough sketch and presented it to Gustav Eiffel. He looked at it carefully and said that this concept is not cooked. People of today would have just dismissed it and said get back to work. But he said continue to work on it. Continue to work on it they did, and the final drawing looks something like this. It was entered into a competition, although the rules were twisted in favour of a steel structure over a stone one. And what was built was an amazing 300-metre tower, more than twice as high as anything previously built. And I'd travelled halfway around the world to see it. Journey up the Seine was a beautiful set of fountains with people paddling their feet, and across from it, well, as you approach the Eiffel Tower, there are all sorts of people trying to sell you things, and the lineup is horrendous, especially during summer holidays. And there is some rather tight security to enter, but that is completely understandable in the times in which we live. The long queue gives you plenty of time to admire the amazing steel structure above you, and then when you board the world famous lifts, the adventure begins.
you haven't got a ticket, it's murder. When you get up here, it's nice and cool, and the view is certainly worthwhile. The apartment at the top of the Eiffel Tower. That's talked about, but I haven't seen it.
Imagine the engineering challenge in the 1880s to build such a thing as the Eiffel Tower. The first problem was to pay for it, but an agreement with the French government was that for each of the 3 levels they would pay upon completion 50 million francs. This arrangement worked well for quite some time. The next problem was the foundations. The area where the tower was to build was a swamp. The same technique was employed as was used on the Brooklyn Bridge, the use of a caisson filled with compressed air. As to the matter of the financial difficulties which come about when construction outweighed the budget, Count Ferdinand de Lacy was responsible for the construction of the Suez Canal, an amazing success, and he thought he could employ the same strategies in the Panama Canal, but it was not working, and he decided, lately so, too late in fact, that he would have to go with locks. And he needed those locks to be constructed quickly, and he was in big trouble. So he approached Gustav Eiffel. Gustav Eiffel agreed to construct the locks at a very inflated price. And this subsidised the construction of the Eiffel Tower. The construction of the Eiffel Tower went something like this. So at the end of 2 years, 2 months and 5 days, the Grand Tower was completed. Over the course of its construction, there were some labour issues and issues around safety. Gustav Eiffel is reported as saying that there is no real difference between a fall at 50 metres and a fall at 300, which is a somewhat cruel but true statement. He offered his workers extra money and they were satisfied with that. It's interesting to note that across all of his many projects there was never a single life lost. The same cannot be said for the Panama Canal. Over the course of its construction there was an incredible 25,000 lives lost. 20,000 under the French and around 5,000 under the Americans. Ferdinand hung in there for 9 years, but the financial strain and the badly made decisions ended his tenure on the project, and there was a massive financial scandal, and Gustav Eiffel was entangled in that, although he did manage to clear his name. The total cost of the project finished up being $639 million US, and it was completed in 1914, a massive amount of money and a huge loss of life. An American colonel, George Washington Go-Trails, and Go-Trail he did, finally finished the project. One of my big regrets in life was that in 1988 I wasn't able to go to World Expo in Brisbane, Australia, because I simply couldn't afford it. So my father and myself planned to travel to World Expo in Dubai in 2020, but with the pandemic it wasn't possible for us to go. And I am considering going to World Expo in Japan next year, but that's another video. Nonetheless, World Expos have always given us things, more so in the past than now, whether it was Marconi's radio, Thomas Edison's phonograph, or even AC power from Westinghouse. It could be argued that the biggest thing that the 1889 World Expo in Paris gave us was the Eiffel Tower, but there was many other things, like France led the way in gas balloons. That's just the first thing that comes to mind. So in the photographs of the time, the Eiffel Tower appears red. I understand that has something to do with the red oxide paint that they used at the time. And the lifts were not working. And to climb to the top was quite expensive. Then, as is now, the higher you go, the more you pay. And in today's money, it would have been 50 euros to climb to the top on the stairs, not in a lift as you would today. The lift was fixed after the trade fair. The agreement was that Eiffel would own the tower for 20 years and then it would be demolished. More about that later. I put together the best I could on the 1889 World Fair. gets the impression, looking at the photos from the fair, that modern architects and designers are seriously lacking. In these modern times, we only seem to be able to build boxes, not elegant structures as were built in that period. The reason for the cost blowouts on the construction of the Eiffel Tower and one of the most difficult technical challenges were the lifts. The American Otis had not long invented the lift before the tower's construction. He demonstrated the safety of his device by having someone cut the cable while he stood in the lift to show the safety of the brakes. Good staff employed him to create the lifts for the first floor to the second. They were a unique design because they had to work at an incline, something which never had been done before. In fact, the lifts, the original ones that was, even come with a driver who sat out in the weather. The French inventor Léon Ledoux worked on the lift in France, and he designed the lifts between the first and second floor, which curiously had double the capacity of the lower lifts. There was a serious technical challenge between the second and third floor, as lifts at that time required a piston to raise and lower the car, and there simply wasn't room within the structure to accommodate a big enough piston. So he designed a system of pulleys whereby a piston of only half the size that what normally would be needed was used. In the early days of the tower, there was a daily signal cannon which was fired, even a theatre, and a large range of shops, all of which were paying rent to Goodstuff. Located up the very top of the tower was Goodstuff Eiffel's private apartment, where he met with a countless number of dignitaries and conducted his business. He made so much money from ticket sales of the tower that he withdrew from business and started to concentrate on science. There were countless experiments done owing to the altitude of the tower, and one of his deep concerns was that after 20 years the tower was going to be knocked down, and it was his plan to make the tower indispensable to Paris and possibly even France. At that time, a wealthy person funding their curiosity for the benefit of mankind was not a foreign concept. The first experiments done on the tower were regarding weather and weather forecasting owing to its high altitude. But ultimately, what saved the Eiffel Tower was radio. A young man approached Goodstuff and said that the taller an antenna, the greater its range. And eventually, the aerial placed on top of the Eiffel Tower was used for military purposes and was found to be indispensable. Thankfully, the marvellous tower was safe. We only have to worry about time itself. However, during World War II, when Hitler realised that the Nazis were going to have to withdraw from Paris, he ordered that Paris be destroyed, and that would have included the Eiffel Tower. Thankfully, the general he gave the order to disobeyed it, both saving Paris, one of the world's most beautiful cities, and the tower, one of the greatest towers in the world. Well, I've been to the top of the Burj Khalifa, but it didn't give me the same thrill that the Eiffel Tower did. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe, and there's a lot more to come.